Well, we are delighted to welcome you back to Curiosity, Not Judgment. Welcome. My name is Birga.
And I'm Gary.
And look at us in the same room at the same time.
I know, huh?
It's been a while.
In Albuquerque, New Mexico.
I know. We have both been traveling, you much more than I, but I'm very glad for us to be back together. And wanted to really talk a little bit about perspective and talking about kind of the concept of, is the grass greener on the other side?
Mm-hmm.
And what happens when you kind of develop that little jealousy monster within you, say, man, I wish I had somebody else's life, or I wish I had that life to live. And so I know that you've got a story from your growing up that really, I think, encapsulates what happens when you wish for a life that someone else leads, and how sometimes it's not what you might think.
Yeah, and a life or a position or a task or just anything. I think it rarely serves us when we are wishing that we could trade places with someone without really thinking it through, or without understanding what it's like to be in that person's shoes. And the story that Birga is talking about is, I was thinking back over some of the stories in my life that have shaped me, and one of my favorite stories happened on the farm when I was about somewhere between 12 and 14. And I was on the farm that was my uncle's farm, and my cousin, who lived there and was a farmer, and I were out repairing, mending, and putting in fence. This is barbed wire fence with posts in the ground. And he's the farmer and I'm the city kid, and I just assumed that he was giving me the tough job. So he was sitting there holding a bale of wire, and I was digging the post holes, putting the posts in, and stapling the wire. So you can imagine that I'm sitting here doing the hard work of post hole digging. Now, it's easier in Iowa with that beautiful rich soil than it would be in Albuquerque with the caliche.
Right.
But I'm having to dig the hole, put the post in, stamp it, all the earth around it, get that firm, take the wire and staple it onto the post. And it's a lot of work. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking at my cousin, who's just kind of sitting there holding the wire, and I'm thinking, hey, is it because I'm from the city and you can, just abuse your city slicker cousin, mm-hmm. or what's going on here? And so then I start thinking about it, and I'm starting to get resentful, right? And I'm saying, you've got the easy job, I've got the hard job. So I'm doing this. So as I'm doing it, I'm looking at him in disgust, and I'm doing it, and I'm stamping things, and I look at him some more, and and he's just got this kind of little, wry smile that he always had on his face. And after a while, he kind of looked at me after I had completed one of the posts, and he just says, "Want to trade?" And I said, "Yes, I do," very indignantly. Mm-hmm. And I went over there. Now, I tried to imagine this big bale of barbed wire. And I am trying to hold it against my chest tight, so that it's tight all the way down the series of posts, and so that he can then put the post in and staple it in, and then we can move on. Holding that barbed wire up against my chest with it poking into me, with my heels in that earth, trying to keep it tight. After a couple of minutes, I was miserable. I was in pain.
Yeah.
I didn't know how much longer I could do it, but I had asked to trade, so my pride gets in the way now, and I'm just suffering and suffering. And after one or two posts, he just looks at me and he goes, "Want to trade back?" I said, "Yes, please." And like I said, he never told anybody else about it. It wasn't holding it over my head or "I told you so." It wasn't anything like that.
Yeah.
It was two simple questions: "Want to trade? Want to trade back?" With no judgment, with no, scorn or anything like that. It was just two simple questions. And he realized what was going on,
Yeah.
but he knew I needed to learn the lesson. And if he would have sat there and said, "Hey, this job is harder than it looks," I wouldn't have believed him.
Right, exactly.
It took me and that whole experience to know, and it was a great life lesson. And I don't always live that lesson, but it certainly frames my experience.
Yeah. And I love that. And I think it's such a powerful illustration how quickly we can look at somebody else's position in life. Maybe it's an actual role within a company or just a status. We can look at that and have that little bit of envy and say, man, if only I could be in their shoes, or if only I had the opportunity to live the life that they're living. If we really had that trade option, we would quickly find that, it's not, the grass is not always greener on the other side, right?
It's not always greener. Sometimes it's much more brown, and it is, and sometimes it's just a difference in skill sets
Yeah.
also. And there are many times when you're looking at a position, you're thinking that's easy. Well, it might be easy for them. It might not be easy for you.
Right.
And there are certain things and characteristics and decision-making processes and roles and other things, the experience that goes into any given position that you, by definition, don't carry the same. And so if the roles were reversed, if you were in that position, you may even find it a struggle. But even if you didn't, there is a process in which that person is in that role, whether you think it's lucky or whether you think it's anything other than just hard work or experience that may have put them there that you may or may not have. And sometimes it's that experience, like we talked about with my cousin Kevin. If I had not had the experience of it, telling people about that or hearing the story is not as impactful as living it.
Yeah. Well, I think about even the folks that look at the very wealthy and some of the freedoms that wealth seems to afford somebody in that position. And there to be that kind of like, woe is me posture and like, oh, if only I could be in that place. But I don't know if we've discussed it on this podcast. I think you and I have probably had conversations about it, maybe offline throughout the years. Just because somebody has the gift of wealth, it doesn't mean they've got a happy life.
No.
And sometimes the wealth compounds the problems that some of us have, outside of the realm of wealth. And so, relational discord and just deep divisions between parents and children, and some of the things that can just go so awry, and just fractured family, fractured lives. And yeah, it may appear from the outside looking at somebody with resources that, oh, they've got it all, but really it's a whole different set of circumstances that they're dealing with. And to your point, stepping into that role for a season might be very illuminating about the challenges that are inherent even in a position of wealth.
So many things come to mind there. It is my personal belief and experience that money is like pouring Miracle Grow on your issues and your problems. And sometimes not having the resources or being in a situation that's a little tough leads to the innovations, leads to the growth that it takes to get out of the situation naturally, as opposed to buying your way out, and or thinking, well, I've got the money for this, I'll just throw some money at it and hope it'll fix. I think our government is legendary at that, and I think we can point to many things where money is not the answer. Proper resources, proper thinking, proper mindset, proper paradigms around the problem are the answer. And money is not always your best resource. And sometimes if money masks the abilities, capabilities, and capacities that you have, that you would otherwise have to be able to address the problem.
Certainly there are some freedoms that come with having a little bit more bandwidth, so to speak, by having that financial freedom. But I think for anyone who's made the transition from being very, very budget tight to maybe having a little bit more financial security, you can think back fondly on the years of budget restraint and say, oh, remember when? Because there is just a natural satisfaction, I think, that comes with just the simplicity of life, and how it's the little things that we take such delight and joy in that all of a sudden are no longer as satisfactory when there is more resource.
I think back fondly, as you say, to the time when I was in enlisted Air Force and living on, believe it or not, $600 a month. And the money amount isn't as important as the fact that it wasn't very much, and even back then. And I remember, having friends over for a meal and darts, or to play cards, playing with the kids out in the playground, and we had such a good time every day. And and so now my activities cost more, and they come with a lot of hassles and sometimes consequences. And is my life better? It's different, but I'm not sure that better is the right adjective.
Right. Well, and there is something that's just so rewarding about being able to see the joy in the simple, the inexpensive, the just natural byproduct of doing family together and doing relationship in times of constraint. It really is a beautiful space, and that sometimes that is very hard to come by, again, when resources are more plentiful. And so I'm wondering if we, just for the course of this podcast, can really talk about the curiosity, not judgment aspect of looking at a situation where we begin to have that little bit of jealousy or thinking the grass is greener on the other side. And what are some of those curious questions we can begin to ask before we let ourselves go down that mental pathway that leads us to dissatisfaction or discontent?
So that's great thinking, and I'm trying to think of what the series of questions might be. Why do I want to trade places? What is it about that person or that person's position, that person's tasks or role that I envy? Is envy helping me out here in this situation? Am I not appreciative of the position that I have? Or understanding and being grateful for the blessings or the things that I have currently.
Right.
And many people wiser than me would say that happiness is not getting everything you want. It's being happy with what you already have. And so asking simple questions, I think, of ourselves and trying to do a little exploring about, is it serving me to obsess about me wanting to trade places or not thinking that person's position is fair? And then what is it about that position or that thing that appeals to me? And is it something that I want to attain and set a goal for? Other than that person, untimely accident or something.
Sure.
What is it that I can do then to move myself into that position? And is that going to be a good thing?
Well, I'm thinking back to what you said even a few minutes ago, that while something may appear to come easy to one person, it may not come easy to the other person based on personality and giftings and talent. And so if you are looking at somebody in the next level of the company, or you're looking at somebody in a position that you think you want to pursue, and you begin to ask some of those curious questions, that is one of those assessments that would be very difficult to do on the outset, as maybe you're trying to, as you say, attain to a goal of going into that position or going into that industry, because you are wired in a particular way. The other person is wired in a different way. And so, if appropriate, and if you have access to that person to ask some questions, I think, again, it always benefits us to just have that moment of exchange and, hey, tell me some of the things that you most like about your role, or tell me some of the things that are the biggest challenges about the role that you're in, and really have an ear to listen. Because, if you say, oh, well, I'm traveling 275 days a year, to really analyze what that statement says. Because while at first blush you may think, oh my gosh, this person gets to travel all the time, nice hotels, nice food, whatever, you are away from your home for 275 days a year. And is that something that would actually meet a desire of your heart, or would it be really a hardship on your relationships, on your marriage, on all of those other things? And so asking some of those questions, again, if you have access to that person, but being curious, like, what does this answer really mean for me and my life and my wiring?
And I think that there can be, and exactly right on, because those are things. My life may or may not be set up to travel 275 days a year. If I've got small children, dogs, things that need to happen at the house on a regular basis, then those things are going to be neglected by definition.
Sure.
The other part about what was occurring to me as you were talking is if there is a role that you like or that someone around you has and you're interested in it, as you said, take them to lunch and ask them about their lives and their pain and see if you can help out in some way. See if you can be of service in that role and intersect with it a little bit and not only learn it. I'll never forget my daughter wanted to be a veterinarian. And so I had a friend who was a veterinarian. And so I said, hey, could my daughter just come and hang out with you for a day? Well, at the end of the day, I asked my daughter, I said, so what do you think? And she's like, oh my God, I would never want to be a veterinarian. Some of those dogs die. It's like, yeah, it's not all glory where you get to hang around animals. And she's still an animal person and she loves animals. But a veterinarian was not what she wanted. She thought she wanted it.
Right.
Until she actually experienced it. And same with my oldest daughter wanted a horse. And had no idea how much work a horse is. Now, you and I both know enough about it to know how much work that is.
To know that I don't want a horse, yeah.
So I said, so I didn't say she couldn't have one. I said, no problem. We were living in Corrales at the time, and I said, hey, I've got some friends who have horses. Just, this summer, you go down and, muck stables for a while and start hanging around the horses, and after, a couple months, if you still want a horse, no problem. Well, you know what the answer was after that. It's like, oh my gosh, that's too much work. And so I think the consequences of that. Now, some people truly, truly enjoy the work of being with a horse and mucking stables and doing all that. And those people, more power to them. If she was one of those people, she would have had a horse. But it's really important to try to understand. Be careful what you ask for.
Right. Well, and just again, the assumption that we make about how someone else's life is so glorious and grand and fantastic merely based on observation from afar. And, to your point, if you were to really walk a mile in their shoes, you may experience something very different, right? And, I've seen the kind of T-shirt meme arena where it says something like, if you've walked a mile in my shoes, you've walked a mile in my shoes, meaning like you can't really understand, right? And it's true. It's very difficult to compare lives, but I think starting with some of those curious questions really is the place to begin. And to be aware, what are we doing that's feeding kind of that envy monster? What are we doing that's causing us to have an elevated view of a different position, a different lifestyle, a different neighborhood, whatever it is that you really wished you had? What is causing that to really rise in our mind's eye? And what is it about our present circumstance that we are dismissing that we really need to reevaluate for the simplicity and the goodness of what we have?
And we often come back to self-awareness, and I think that if you looked at another person and tried to say, "Wow, I'd really like to switch positions or switch lives with that other person," that other person may not be in a great family situation. They may not be in a great friend situation. They may not be in a great relationship situation. There may not be in a great mental situation, right? If you think about physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, how are you doing? And then how that other person might be doing, you may find that you wouldn't want to trade lives.
Right.
I think it's also a very good thing to assess how you're doing with your own, place and position and how you're doing as a person, and rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. And then if you have an area that's a 3 or 4, well, first of all, if you've got an area that's a 8, 9, or 10, be grateful and see how you can maintain that. Make sure that you're maintaining that. But the other part is if you've got an area of your life that is not, if it's less than a 5, are you willing to do some work to change that? And what could you do? And brainstorm that. Part of that might be part of the position that other person holds. But I would bet a majority of the time that it is not that.
Well, and I think another thing to perhaps question is, are you managing well the things that you have now before you begin to wish for more? And I can say, I might wish for a bigger house, a bigger piece of property, bigger whatever, but I'll tell you, I am not a good housekeeper. I'm not. I'm not a good housekeeper. I am not, taking care of the details of keeping my house up the way that I should now. So what makes me think another 500 or 1,000 square feet is going to benefit me? Or is it just going to be more space for me to do a poor job on cleaning?
Yeah. Oh, well, if I had another bedroom, I could just throw all my junk in there and I'd have a clean house. Okay, think about the natural consequences of that.
Yeah.
If I had this next position, then I would act differently in this organization. Well, I have to tell you about a basic principle, and that is you need to be performing at that next level before you're going to be given that next level.
Right.
You can't say, well, if you give me that level, then I'll perform. Where's the data? That's not worth the risk. It's frankly not good for you or the organization. If you're already performing at that level, then you might say, okay, when a position becomes available, then I am going to be ready to fulfill it because I'm already acting as I already have the skills. I've developed the skills. I've developed the temperament. I've developed whatever I need to be able to fill that position. So when it becomes available, I'm ready. But to come into an organization and think that after 3 days you should be the CEO, and I love this one. Well, if I ran the show, it would be different. Okay, how it would be different? Why would it be different? What do you know that maybe management doesn't know, and what can you do to articulate that properly and affect a change? There are easy questions to ask before you go to just judgment of these guys are all stupid and they don't know how did they even get there. There's probably a reason why they're there, and it may not be legitimate. We could find that out. But the fact is that they are, and working within the system is sometimes easier than trying to just criticize the system.
Now, real quickly, I want to go over one other kind of category in this realm. And we are in the fall season, and we are getting into fall holidays, or will be soon. Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, etc., where you might find yourself looking wistfully, longingly at someone else's scenario for relationship and finding like, man, I wish I had that kind of family gathering. I wish I had the opportunity to get together with others. I know we've touched on this briefly in past episodes, but if you do not have the opportunity where you're geographically close, or maybe there's not the relational health where you can be around groups of people and you find yourself wishing you were in another position, what are some of those curious questions you can ask about how do I change my circumstance now, and how do I be a blessing to other people despite the fact that I don't have that idyllic family scenario?
And asking those questions with relationship to some time out.
Yeah.
In other words, I need to have a friend group in the next 2 weeks that I can depend on, and through the holidays. I would say the odds are not going to happen.
Right.
What could I do now that leads to this by next year? My son just sent me something to fill out, and it's about having a life that's been lived well, and it starts you at the end, and like many of these do, and says, "Hey, what do you want your last week of life to be?" Well, one of my answers was, I want to be surrounded by a loving family. What can I do now to make sure that that's the result?
Yeah.
Because what you do now is what's going to determine your future. And I think we, in our society today, and I'm not criticizing our society today, I just think it's a reality and an observation, we have kind of disconnected what I do now is what determines my future. The choices that I make today will have a direct impact on my future. And I need to start working now if I want that future. I can't just wish for that future and not do anything about it.
Right. Well, so lots of different questions that got posed during today's episode, and I hope that you are formulating your own if you find yourself in that place where you're looking across the fence line, so to speak, and thinking the grass looks a little bit greener. So begin to ask some of those questions for yourself to really consider where you're at and ultimately where you want to go, and how do you achieve that if indeed that is the greener spot that you want to find yourself positioned in later in life. So thank you so much for listening. We will get back together next week for another episode of Curiosity, Not Judgment. Thanks so much for listening.
In the meantime, take care.